All right. Good evening, everybody. Today, our topic is balancing blood sugar. So, as I usually do at the beginning of these, I'll share a little bit of my experience with this topic. So, when I first started seeing kind of like a functional medicine, holistic healthcare doctor, they told me that I had a like pre-diabetes, basically based on my glucose and my HA1C, which, if you're not familiar, HA1C is like a saturation of your blood with sugar over the past 3 months kind of a measure. So it's really like the standby for figuring out if you have diabetes or pre-diabetic, things of that nature. So I was kind of frustrated with that diagnosis because I didn't really feel like I ate very much processed food or very much sugar, really. So I didn't really understand why I had such a problem with it, but little did I know that there was actually a lot more to balancing blood sugar than actually just your consumption of the product. So we're going to kind of touch on both today, how to like avoid a lot of sugar in your products and in your cooking and in your meals, but also the other parts about balancing blood sugar that are besides just eating it. So some ways to figure out if you have blood sugar instability is if you have, I'm going to read off some symptoms to you guys. So, craving sweets during the day, getting irritable if your meals are missed, or what I like to call hangry, super dependent on coffee or other stimulants, getting lightheaded if your meals are missed, eating relieves fatigued, you get feeling shaky, jittery, have poor memory, kind of forgetful, get agitated easily, maybe somewhat depressed. There's a lot of neurological symptoms that go along with blood sugar instability. So blurry vision, fatigue after meals, must have a sweet tooth like after you eat, having your waist being larger than your hips, noticing you have to use the restroom more often, or you're really thirsty, or just plain difficulty losing weight. So those are a lot of the most commons. The general rule of thumb is if eating relieves your fatigue or your hangry kind of feelings, then that means you have generally low blood sugar and your body's screaming for you to help level it out. If you get tired after you eat, a lot of times that means that you're getting into insulin resistance, almost diabetes kind of problems because your insulin's not properly able to balance your blood sugar anymore. So that's a little bit to get started. So why is balancing blood sugar so important? So first and foremost, you guys have heard me talk about the standard American diet, or the SAD diet. So that diet is full of processed foods. We live high stress, fast-paced lifestyles. And instead of compensating with nutritious food, we generally trash our bodies with inflammation. Inflammation is at the core of most chronic diseases today, including cancer, heart disease, diabetes, overweight, obesity, and fibromyalgia. And that's really just to name a few. There's a lot of other thyroid problems and things that we could add in here as well. The first step to combating chronic disease is balancing blood sugar. So if we can break this down a little bit, when I say we live like high stress, fast paced lifestyles, I mean, a lot of people skip meals, which is a huge thing for balancing blood sugar. A lot of people replace meals with stimulants like coffee and 5-hour energies. People are really always trying to cut calories because they're paranoid about gaining weight. So then they skip meals even more because they're paranoid that they don't want to eat too many calories. And so the cycle just kind of goes on and on and on into this like never-ending downward spiral where we're skipping meals or not eating enough or just using caffeine for a meal or just not eating nutrient-dense food, and then you just end up with worse and worse blood sugar issues, and that contributes to a lot more things that we'll get into. So obviously we all like sugar from time to time, but unfortunately so does things like cancer, inflammation, diabetes, yeast, arthritis, and insomnia, and that's, again, just to name a few. Pretty much most other diseases can be linked to blood sugar instability just because, like I said, in the standard American diet, every single product you buy at the grocery store is loaded with sugar. You can hardly buy ketchup without it having high fructose corn syrup in it, right? I mean, every canned good, every condiment, anything you pick up off the shelf is loaded with sugar and most likely high fructose corn syrup because that's like a cheaper version of sugar. So yeah, just to get into a few of these. Cancer is a big one because cancer has probably 4 times the number of sugar receptors than your normal cell does because cancer cells are very metabolically active. So they feed off of sugar like crazy. And that really just helps them grow and helps them perpetuate. So a really good way to kind of starve out cancer cells is to eat the least amount of sugar as possible. Inflammation, like I have gone into before, that's a very broad topic. But unfortunately, things like high fructose corn syrup definitely promote inflammation just because the body doesn't process them very well, and it just increases the amount of those cells that are present in the body. Diabetes is pretty obvious because that's caused by blood sugar instability and eating way too much sugar. Yeast is generally a normal bacteria in your gut. Unfortunately, we end up with these yeast infections, which are really just yeast overgrowths that become overgrowths because of what we're eating. Okay, yeast feed on undigested sugar. They feed on a lot of sugar from grains, sugar from dairy, and then just, plain table sugar. So if you're somebody that battles chronic yeast infections, try not to cause it an infection, but call it an infection because it's really a normal part of your body. You just need to manage your diet so that it's not overgrown all the time. Almost every gut infection that we name today is really just a normal gut bacteria that gets overgrown. So even like a lot of people call H. pylori an infection, but even H. pylori, which is a bacteria, is usually a normal part of the gut flora. It just gets overgrown when we're in like really high stress states and not eating very well. Okay, so arthritis and inflammation are gonna go hand in hand. Arthritis is really just inflammation of the joints. And so insomnia is a huge one because most people don't really think of this, but if I can give you guys an example without drawing a graph. So let's say you eat a piece of cake around 9 o'clock at night, or like ice cream or something that people crave late at night. So your blood sugar is gonna go super high when you eat that, right? And then your body's gonna try to bring it back down to hit the homeostasis. And unfortunately, a lot of times when we have blood sugar instability, when we're trying to bring that blood sugar down, we bring that blood sugar down way too low where the body hits like an alarm state and it pumps adrenaline, and that wakes you up in the middle of the night. So that's when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're just like wide awake, staring at the ceiling, totally not tired, can't fall asleep, always have to wake up to go to the bathroom. Things of that nature are often related to blood sugar instability because of these crashes that can either be caused by eating too much sugar late at night or not eating enough for dinner or just eating at the wrong times during the day and creating bad cycles. So as you guys can see in this list, these are some other things that sugar also causes. So it can cause acne, skin irritation, aching limbs, artery stiffening, hypoglycemia, fatigue, headaches, high blood pressure, depression, violent behavior, and changing hormones. So this changing hormones is important because when we have blood sugar instability, it tends to promote an interchange between testosterone and estrogen. So unfortunately, this usually leads to females having too much testosterone and men having too much estrogen. So balancing out your male and female hormones also has a huge root in blood sugar stability. So these are just some fun stats for you guys. So the average American eats about 130 pounds of sugar a year. So that's 3 pounds per week. Now, if you're thinking about that bag you buy at the grocery store, right? Like, that's a lot of sugar. In the 1800s, most people had 45 grams in 5 days. Now it's more like 765 grams in 5 days, or 153 a day. So this sugar amounts to about 500 calories a day. So that's about equal to having 10 pieces of bacon, if you want to think of it that way. So that's a lot of calories in sugar, and that is not doing anything for your nutritional status, right? So most high sugar foods are also very, very low in nutrients. So that's basically 500 empty calories you're eating a day, if you want to think of it that way, unless you're eating it with fruit. So the FDA actually recommends 25 grams a day. So for once, I actually agree with the FDA on that being a good recommendation. Unfortunately, 25 grams a day is about equivalent to 1 apple. So as you can imagine, you're going to hit that 25 grams of sugar very, very quickly. Even like a tablespoon of peanut butter generally has 5 grams of sugar in it. So it is super, super hard to get down to that amount of sugar. And the American Heart Association also recommends 9.5 teaspoons a day at most. And so even that is really difficult for a lot of people to hit that amount of sugar. Okay, so here's my weight loss tip for the evening. If you want to count your carbs and figure out like a sweet spot for weight loss, the sweet spot for weight loss is usually going to be between like 60 and 100 grams of carbohydrates. That's not grams of sugar, that's grams of carbohydrates. 100 to 150 is usually easy to maintain your weight. Anything below 50 is going to be ketosis, so that's something that has to be highly monitored if you're going that low. And then when you get above 150 and especially up to 300, that's when you're getting just insidious weight gain that's leading to obesity. So this is for monitoring if you're eating less than 50 a day. So that's when you're going to want to get these ketone strips that you see on the right here, and that's just going to monitor ketosis. You just don't want to be getting into the dark purple ranges on this because it can be dangerous or mean that you're really dehydrated. But another really good thing that you can buy at Walgreens is just a blood sugar monitor. A lot of people just think that these are just for diabetics, but they're really, you can get one for like 20 bucks with some test strips. And just, you know, do an experiment on yourself if you don't want to spend a lot of money on blood work all the time to figure out what your blood sugar is. So you can just, you know, poke your finger and get the little blood spot, see how well your blood work is being regulated. Maybe test first thing in the morning, test before you eat, test after you eat, test different times during the day, and then just see kind of like what your pattern is and how stable you are. You really want to aim for like the 80s and 90s on this. When you get below the 80s, especially below the 60s, that's when people feel like they have absolutely no energy, and that's because your blood sugar is really low. When you're getting over 100, it usually means that you've eaten too many carbohydrates. So that's kind of like a fun way to doctor yourself, if you will. So this is a breakdown of how much sugar people usually drink or eat in the United States. So the vast majority of it is what people drink in soft drinks and fruit drinks. So half of the juices you buy at the store are going to be mostly sugar and not even a lot of fruit. Obviously candy, desserts, baked goods, those kind of things are pretty self-explanatory. But most of the sugar that we eat is in the processed food that we buy and in our drinks. So even desserts is a very small portion, okay, if you want to think of it that way. So our blood sugar issues aren't all just from, oh, I had a brownie one time during the week. It's all these other factors. That being said, if you don't consume these on a regular basis, but you still have blood sugar balance issues, it might not be as much what you're putting in your mouth related, but it might be more lifestyle factors. So it could be things like skipping meals, replacing meals with caffeine, like I mentioned, Just being really high stress, not taking time to sit down and eat your meals. So cramming meals in the car between events, not taking time to breathe and really enjoy what you're eating can lead to blood sugar instability. And then probably one of the best ones here is an underlying deficiency. A lot of people will crave sugar because they don't have enough protein or because they don't have enough fat. So this might be because you're not eating enough protein or fat, or it might be because you're not absorbing it. Those are going to be the kind of things that a functional medicine doctor like me can figure out for you with your blood work to see if you're actually absorbing nutrients. And then another underlying deficiency can be just not eating enough nutrient-dense foods. So a lot of people don't get their daily dose of fruits and vegetables kind of thing. There are very few of us that hit, 5 or 6 servings of veggies a day. So a lot of times if you don't have enough B vitamins because you didn't eat enough vegetables, or you don't have enough protein because you didn't eat enough meat, or you don't have enough fat because you're on a low-fat diet, all of those things can make you crave more sugar or have blood sugar instability. Okay, so I also wanted to point out that sugar is a very, very powerful addiction. So like in this photo, you can see sugar actually stimulates similar parts of the brain as cocaine. And they've proven that when they gave like sugar and cocaine to rats in experiments, it was actually more difficult to get them off of sugar than it was the drug. So that's something to consider when you're trying to quit sugar. It's a very addictive substance, and even your gut bacteria, things like yeast that feed off of sugar, will actually like communicate with your brain and make you crave sugar even more. So when you're really trying to initially give up sugar, it is hard because everything else in your body is telling you that it's a good thing to eat. All right, so back to this photo with sugar addiction just being a never-ending cycle. So you eat high sugar foods, it stimulates like serotonin in your brain, automatically makes you feel happy. Your blood sugar spikes a ton, probably too much if you're eating a really high carbohydrate, high sugar meal. Then all of a sudden your blood sugar is going to drop because your body's trying to even things back out. And when your blood sugar drops, then you're going to get really sleepy, snoozy, want to take a nap after lunch kind of a thing. And it's going to store excess blood sugar as fat in your waist. And then generally after you crash for a little while, your blood sugar will normal out again, and either you'll crave more food to balance out the blood sugar, or the body's going to think that you're starving when your blood sugar gets really, really low. So if your body thinks that you're starving, it's going to crave more easy calories, aka more sugar and easy carbohydrates, which is just going to keep leading you in this never-ending circle. So really the trick is breaking that cycle. Okay. So here's just my opinion on different sugar alternatives. Okay, so absolutely no artificial sweeteners. Okay, anything on this list of like NutraSweet, Sweet and Low, Splenda, Equal, Sunnit, these are like down here it says lab studies on rats. These rats became even fatter through the 0 calories than they did on sugar. Okay, these chemicals trick the brain. They think you're getting a sugary meal anyway, so it's gonna still spike your insulin, which is gonna still promote production of belly fat. And not to mention, a lot of these are just really toxic to your brain, period, so they're not a good thing to have. So I would always say it's better to have the natural alternatives than to go to these 0 calorie substitutes. The only zero calorie substitute that may be kind of okay is stevia, but even then, like, remember, when your body tastes something sweet, you're still going to have a hormone response to it, which means it's still going to want to store sugar, it's still going to want to create body fat, kind of a thing. So sometimes it's best just to give the body what it thinks it's already eating and just eat real sugar. So the best option for real sugar is generally maple syrup, especially if you can get grade B, because then there's a lot more natural enzymes in it to help you break it down better. And same thing goes for coconut nectar. Honey, agave, figs, and dates all have a high amount of fructose, so they're all going to spike your blood sugar quite a bit, even more so than maple syrup. But like I said, when you're like baking and you really want sweets, it's better for your body just to have fun and enjoy the sweets rather than eating these 0-calorie alternatives, because it's best if your body creates a hormone for your hormone to actually have something to do, rather for that hormone to create something to do because you ate a 0-calorie food. I hope that makes sense. It kind of goes with the like you use it or you lose it principle with the body. Like you might as well use it correctly rather than keeping trying to trick the brain all the time. All right, so 5 ways to balance blood sugar. All right, so number 1 thing to do, avoid the middle aisles. So if I haven't stressed this enough, all of the boxed, canned, frozen, processed food has a lot of added sugar. And anytime you buy anything that is low fat, it has added sugar. Even if you buy like a canned thing of peaches or pineapple, most of the time they've added sugar syrup or high fructose corn syrup to it, okay? So it's best to read the food label if you are in the middle aisles trying to get some kind of healthy alternative, but just like make sure that sugar is not the first ingredient, because when you're looking at an ingredient list on the back of a box, generally whatever ingredient is first is in the highest concentration in that product. So if you're buying ketchup and the first ingredient is sugar, that generally means that that ketchup is not mostly tomatoes, it's mostly sugar. So that's something to keep in mind when shopping. This is my favorite food pyramid. So as I mentioned in other things, if you want more information on this, listen to the paleo lecture. But I always think that it is best for you to drink mostly a lot of water, eat like half your plate every day in veggies, a lot of healthy meat and fish and healthy fats, and then fruits, nuts, oils, and spices in the smallest portions compared to those. Okay, so tip number 2 is eat often. So this is like eat breakfast, eat second breakfast, bedtime snack, all of the above. A lot of times this is really key initially to balancing blood sugar and eliminating those like hangry feelings. My biggest take home with this is eating breakfast. So as you guys have probably heard with my metabolism fire analogy before, the fat is the logs, the protein is the kindling, carbohydrates are the paper. So if you want to be fuller longer throughout the day, you need to have more logs or more fat and more protein and more kindling, and you don't really need very much of the carbohydrates or paper because you burn them off very quickly. So if you're waking up in the morning and all you're having is a smoothie, I'll say that because I know that that's easy and a lot of people do that. And that smoothie is mostly just like fruit and then maybe protein powder if you're lucky and some milk. You're probably either going to be hungry in a couple hours or crash epically at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's not enough for your body to run on all day. All right, like you definitely need to be eating a bigger breakfast, medium-sized lunch, smaller dinner. That'll be the best for your metabolism and keeping your blood sugar stable and not getting that afternoon crash. Okay. Number 3, eat more fat. So like I guess I jumped the gun on the metabolism fire thing, but so many people avoid fat because it's been just demonized since the 80s, saying that eating more fat causes you to have heart disease. Not necessarily true, because if you get the healthy fats like omega-3s, by the way, omega-3s are a fat, so everybody knows, omega-3s actually like decrease the incidence of heart disease. So you need to be eating the correct fats, not eating low fat. So any kind of plant fat is great because those are usually the ones that are high on omega-3s. Fish, also super high on omega-3s. And if you buy the high quality version of a lot of meats like grass-fed beef, it actually has higher portions of omega-3s in it. So beef doesn't have to be the enemy if you're buying the right qualities. And then any kind of like free range animals generally have better omega-3 levels in them as well. So anything that you're like hunting, anything like venison or pheasants or ducks and that kind of thing. Oops, okay, so this picture is pretty small, but I think it shows, it's a good depiction. Basically what this is showing is the woman on the right is eating like a bagel and cream cheese carb kind of breakfast. The woman on the left is having bacon and eggs. The woman that's eating the bacon and eggs has a way smaller waist girth than the one that's eating like probably the carbohydrates and coffee every morning. So moral of the story is it's not usually the bacon that's making you fat. It's getting a bagel full of carbs that tells your body to keep storing more fat, making you fatter, which makes you hungry in an hour, which makes you snack more, which makes you hungrier at dinner, which makes you binge eat. So it's like this never-ending cycle when you don't get a good breakfast in, is the moral of the story. I mean, that's something I totally noticed with my body. Like, if I don't eat a good breakfast, I'm irritable, like, or depressed basically the entire day. Eating a solid breakfast, it makes my brain on point, it makes my exercise on point, and it makes my relationships on point. And going back into that fat just a little bit more, your brain is also a very fatty organ. So it requires a lot of fat to myelinate the nerve fibers and so that your body can actually transmit impulses correctly. So a lot of times when people go on these low fat diets, they actually end up with depression or feeling like they almost have Alzheimer's because their brain can't communicate when it doesn't have an adequate amount of these healthy fats. So, all right, number 4 in balancing blood sugar is decreasing inflammation. So this number 4 is going to be kind of a loaded tip because there's so many things that go into decreasing inflammation. So that can be anything from changing your diet to a more anti-inflammatory diet, such as like the Paleolithic diets or the Mediterranean diets, kind of a thing. It can be taking supplements, like a lot of people have heard of like omega-3s and turmeric and things of that nature. But a lot of times you really need to figure out what the underlying cause of that inflammation actually is. So the underlying cause might be your diet, but it also might be like a million other factors, right? So it might have something to do with having underlying infection that you've had ever since you had a bladder infection that was really bad when you were 5 years old, that maybe never gotten taken care of, or a really bad hormone instability, or maybe you just have something in your genetics that makes you unable to deal with certain byproducts in your body. So there's like a ton of things that can be underlying to this inflammation. I mean, it might even be something as simple as like overtraining. So this is something that you might have to look into more deeply with a functional medicine kind of doctor, for sure. But yeah, as you guys can see here in the picture, insulin resistance can lead to elevated blood sugar, hypertension, elevated triglycerides, inflammation, sleep apnea, PCOS, any kind of heart disease, blood clots, neurological problems, abdominal fat. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on, right? Because sugar just feeds all of these bad issues that we commonly suffer from. Okay, so This is just another kind of clip on functional medicine for you guys, and just to let you know like what the difference between a functional medicine doctor and what a normal doctor might look at. So here we have in the blue are what functional ranges are. So those are something that I might look at in my office. The red levels are what your traditional doctor is going to look at. Okay, so and then here we have on the far right is an example of some numbers. So somebody might go into a normal doctor and have a blood sugar of 73, and they might be complaining that, well, my brain's not really working as well as I want it to, or I don't have energy, or I feel hangry. And the traditional doctor might look at these red numbers and say, oh, well, you're in the normal ranges, so you should feel fine. Whereas if you came into my office, I would look at that number and be like, oh yeah, when my blood sugar's at a 73, I feel like I need to take a nap. So no wonder you don't feel normal. We need to figure out how to stabilize your blood sugar. So that's just an example of one of the numbers that I might look at in my office to kind of diagnose people a little bit differently, because I diagnose people based on the level that they're going to feel symptoms, whereas a lot of medical doctors diagnose people only to a point where they diagnose a disease, right? So you might have symptoms a long time before you have a disease, and that's why I want to see people when they're having the symptoms so I can prevent them from getting to the point where they have a disease like diabetes, okay? Okay, so tip number 5 is avoid stimulants and help out your adrenals. Okay, so if you want to look at this graph, we have 3 things in here. We have blood sugar, cortisol, and insulin. So your pancreas is the organ that makes insulin. Your adrenals make cortisol. Okay, so as you can imagine, you need your pancreas and your adrenals to be intact to balance this blood sugar. All right, so remember I said before that it might not always be the amount of sugar that you're eating that's causing your problems. And that is because of this cortisol factor here. So if you have really high stress can lead to higher cortisol, and high cortisol is also going to influence your blood sugar. So it is very important to balance the adrenals when it comes to balancing blood sugar. Okay, and to give you an example of like why this is the way that it is because let's say you're running from a tiger. So this is the traditional analogy that comes with the adrenals. You're running from a tiger, your body is going to secrete like all of this adrenaline, right, to get you running. But how do you think your muscles get the energy to run? They get the energy because your blood sugar increases, okay? So if you're chronically in this state where you think that you're running from the tiger, your body is going to constantly be pumping out more sugar into your bloodstream, and then your insulin's going to be trying to bring it down, and then your insulin's going to get exhausted and lead to this insulin resistance that we hear about. So a lot of times balancing out the adrenals is also a very important step in balancing blood sugar. And again, I have a whole nother lecture that we can go into with the adrenals because they're a very, very complex organ. But my simple way of saying what the adrenals control is they control sweet, salty sex. So they balance blood sugar, they balance a lot of the different salt levels in your blood, and they balance a lot of your sex hormones. If you're not making a sex hormone like estrogen or testosterone from your male and female hormones, your adrenals is making the rest, okay? So really important for that gland to be intact. So here's just a graph to show you what insulin and cortisol do. So let's use the example that you ate a piece of cake again. So this orange line is blood sugar. So your blood sugar is going to go up a ton because you ate that cake. Your insulin is going to try to bring it down back into this normal range. Sometimes it goes below the normal range, so then cortisol is going to pump in to try to bring blood sugar back up to normal range. And so if you're constantly eating high sugar meals or skipping meals or eating fake sugars kind of a thing, I mean, if you eat a fake sugar, for example, your insulin is still going to fire, but it's not going to have any sugar to act on. So it's going to start grabbing other random sugar and storing it as fat, even though it didn't really need to, is kind of the moral of the story there. But you don't want to mess with these two hormones. They're very important for keeping your blood sugar stable, and your body functions on your blood sugar. I mean, that is like the heart of your metabolism. So you want these two hormones to be working as efficiently as possible. Okay. So I think I just covered this for the most part. But yeah, just another quick bit on thyroid. So your thyroid is also a very important organ with blood sugar. So a lot of people have this like thyroid disease and things like that, and they have no idea what your thyroid is even responsible for. So your thyroid is primarily responsible for your metabolism. So like the rate at which you like produce and use energy. So let's say, you know, glucose or sugar or blood sugar is your energy. So can you guys kind of start to imagine how if your blood sugar and your energy source is constantly off or constantly being messed up, that your thyroid is always going to be in this constant state of confusion as well, because that is reacting and using the energy that is provided by the blood sugar. So they're very tightly wound. So a lot of thyroid or fluctuating thyroid issues can actually be due to blood sugar. Okay, so I try to include a lot of different pictures because I know a lot of people learn differently. So here's another way of saying the same thing. Let's start with this blood sugar crash triangle that a lot of people get after they eat a cruddy meal. So let's say you blood sugar crash and then you eat a bunch of sugar to try to get energy, or you are stressed out because you blood sugar crashed and you still have a lot of stuff to do in the day, or you compensate for your blood sugar crash with caffeine, alcohol, tobacco, or other stimulants. These stimulants, stress, and sugar are going to directly impact the adrenal glands, because the adrenal glands are going to try to secrete this cortisol hormone to raise your blood sugar, or your epinephrine to raise blood sugar as well, which is going to increase your heart rate, increase your blood pressure, to try to get you more apt to be able to run from the tiger, like I mentioned before. So your pancreas is then going to respond to that high blood sugar, because you can't have too high of blood sugar. If it gets to a certain level, it'll start to caramelize your brain. So the insulin is going to try to lower that blood sugar back down to a normal level. When you have too much insulin running around, that leads to more inflammation. And then if the insulin acts too heavily, it's going to decrease your blood sugar too much again, which is then going to lead you back to this blood sugar crash. And that explains the never-ending vicious cycle of stimulants, sugar, and stress on your body. Okie dokie. So last but not least, I wanted to get into a little bit on supplements. Gymnema is an herb that can really help people break sugar cravings. So can oregano oil, but I think oregano oil mostly just works because it makes everything, well, they both work because then they make everything that you put in your mouth after that taste like junk. So if you're having a bad sugar craving, then you can take one of these two things and it'll make sugar taste gross, so you won't want to eat it. That's basically how those work. But there's a ton of other things that go into balancing blood sugar. So chromium and palladium are a couple minerals that are commonly low in people with blood sugar issues. Oftentimes B vitamins can be low as well. B vitamins are often low because your body uses so many of them to compete with blood sugar issues or eating too many carbohydrates or too many grains. And we can also take this even further into adrenal support supplements like phosphatidylserine that helps you balance your cortisol. There are a ton of adrenal balancing supplements out there that are basically just adrenal glands crushed up into little pills that help a lot of people. So there's a lot of things that you can take. I've recently started taking Shakeology, and I've noticed that really, really helps with my blood sugar. I just got my blood work done, and it was like the best my blood sugar's been in a few years. So, but I've also been eating very, very strict anti-inflammatory diet. So there's a lot of things that go into balancing the blood sugar. Definitely, if you have any further questions on that, my email is just drrachelbrooks@gmail.com. So that's just drrachelbrooks@gmail.com. Or check out my Dr. Rachel's Functional Fitness page. And I can definitely give everybody more ample suggestions on how to balance your blood sugar.